Now let's go to the reports and analysis. So for this, there is a menu button which is called reports and analysis. So the moment I click this, I am taken to another page where I have weight and BP trend, blood glucose trends, food consumption trend, and correlations. So if I select weight and BP, I have this weight trend which I can select. So let's see the weight trend for 1 year. So I select the dates, and to have a nice x-axis value, I give it as 45 kilos. And when I do a submit, what happens is that it shows me a graph. Within this graph, this red line is the overweight BMI line, blue line and pink line are the ideal BMI lines. In fact, the pink line is the six-pack line and yellow line is the underweight line. The green line is your data, how you have moved. So if you see here, this person has moved from high 70s to somewhere around 65 kilos. So this software uses your system parameters where you have entered your height to calculate the ideal BMI. So that's why it becomes important to fill in the system parameters. So it says that it also displays your current weight and your current BMI, and in fact tells exactly what the ideal BMI should be. Now similarly, the software gives you your blood pressure trend. So if you select date and do a submit, it brings out your blood pressure charts. So how your systolic, dystolic and pulse rates have moved. Now this also gives a nice blood glucose with meals. So if you select a particular event, for example, all the events are there, that you can see what your how your blood glucose has moved with event like wake up, breakfast, before lunch, after lunch and so on. So let's say I want to see how my blood glucose has moved during the lunch. I select before lunch, I select after lunch and I do a submit. So it uses the system parameter where I had selected the upper control limits for fasting and upper control limits for post meal. So here the red line is the post meal control limit and these green lines is how my blood glucose after lunch has moved. So it also gives a pie chart denoting that 40% of time my blood glucose has stayed within limits, but around 60% of the time it is not within what my ideal desired limit would be. So now if we select, let's say, before lunch and after lunch trend, so it gives a trend across two meals, across before lunch and after lunch. So if I do this, what it shows is that I didn't have much data. So you can see here that before lunch this was the blood glucose and after lunch this is how it has moved. So in a similar way, if we select wake up and after breakfast, so this is what we see. Now if you see here, the green line indicates the wake up fasting reading and blue line indicates the after breakfast reading. Now a strange thing is that the after breakfast is lower than the wake up readings. For a diabetic, this is the typical trend, but you see here both the lines are converging, so it denotes a better control. The software also provides a food consumption trend, so you can see how your consumption of calorie, carbohydrate, protein, fat and cholesterol has moved over the time. So let's select a date range and let's see how calories has moved. Now if you see here, these are the two control limits for calorie and carbohydrate that you had set in your system parameter. So it uses these two parameters to see to to see if you are within limits or outside it. So let's see how I have done for calorie. Now this red line is the line of control, and if you can see that most of the readings are below this red line, so the calorie intake has been pretty much on target. You can also see an overall distribution of different food components in your meal. So if I do this, what it shows me is that 52% of my meals, 52% of my meal is generally carbohydrate, and rest of it is protein, fats and fiber. This software also denotes the average carbohydrate, protein, fat, fiber and cholesterol consumption, so I can immediately know exactly what's my consumption trend. Now let's see what correlation has for us. So correlation has four things: good and bad meals that you have eaten, glucose variation with food components like carbs, proteins and fibers, glucose variation with weight, and effect of one food on blood glucose. So if we select good and bad meals that I have eaten, so what it does is, let's select a date range, and it asks me what is a good glucose level for the after meal. What's the good glucose level after meals for me? So I have entered 140. Actually this parameters is fetched from the system table. So the moment I submit, what it does is it goes to my food database, it goes to my consumption database and sees which food when I have eaten have caused my blood glucose to be under 140 and which ones are more than 140. So these are the good meals, say the 3 breakfast it shows and the food items it gives with the quantity I have eaten. So this has caused my blood glucose to stay within 140. So what the software does is that whenever you have entered a meal, and after that meal on the same day, if you have entered a blood glucose value, then it correlates and finds out how things have gone good or how things have gone bad. So it gives it gives a nice list of food which works for you, and it also immediately denotes the food which have not worked for you. Now let's see what's the glucose variation with food component. So here what it tells you is how say if how my glucose has varied with carbohydrates. So if I do a submit, it shows a graph like this. The green lines are the glucose readings and red lines are the carbohydrate readings. So as you can see, whenever there is a peak in carbohydrate, there is a peak in blood glucose. So this kind of correlation is immediately uh, indicated by this analysis. So now let's see what's the glucose variation with weight. So let me select a date, and when I do a submit, what it does is it sees all the glucose readings across the time, across the date range, and it also sees the weight across those date ranges and finds a correlation which is indicated by the blue line. Now only things to be seen is if the blue line is decreasing, blue line is going down, then actually the blood glucose control is improving with weight. improving with reduction of weight. So it gives you a direct correlation between weight reduction and improvement in your blood glucose control. The last thing on this is effect of one food on blood glucose. So if I select this, the last thing is effect of one food on blood glucose. So what it does is that if you select a date range and if you select a food, now this food list is populated from whatever you have entered in the database, food database. So I select the multigrain bread, and when I do a submit, what it does is that on whichever date I had eaten multigrain bread, it goes over it, finds out the blood glucose value after I had eaten in those days. Obviously you must have entered those blood glucose after the specific meals, and it tells me the blood glucose value after consumption of multigrain bread. But since our meal is not just the multigrain bread, along with that we had eaten something else as well, so it lists down the other food components also which I had eaten. But you can see a trend that whenever multigrain bread was consumed, the general blood glucose level, if you see here, are always less than 140. At one time it was about 190, but during that time you can see if there was any other specific food item that was eaten. So you can find out or make out a trend that you can deduce as to what a particular food can have a desirable or undesirable effect on you. There are two more interesting analysis. One is glucose trend over a day. Now this does not reflect accurately your body's exact pattern of glucose metabolism, but it gives a very rough approximate trend. So let's see. Suppose you select a date range and do a submit. What it does is that for the date ranges that you have specified, it goes across your database, and for each hour of the day it fetches the blood glucose value and calculates an average out of it, and then it plots it across a 24-hour daytime. Now, not very accurate, but it does give you a trend of how your blood glucose moves. So if you see this plot, what it says is that, say, till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the blood glucose stays pretty much within about 120, or say within the limits of 140. But after lunch, the blood glucose shoots and goes beyond 140. So you can point this trend out to your doctor and ask for specific advice as to what is to be done so that this peak after the lunch can be reduced and you be within normal value. The other item on this list is estimated HbA1c. Now this this is just an estimation, and it can vary about 5 to 15% from your lab values. So whatever date you choose, what it does is that it goes and calculates the HbA1c reading based on your blood glucose values that you have entered for the last 3 months. So, and what it also does is that it goes to 3-month period previous to the 3-month period that is being calculated now. So between 6 to 3 months it goes and sees what was the trend. So if it sees that your HbA1c value has improved, it indicates that, and it also tries to figure out whether you have started eating more calories or more carbohydrates. So this kind of analysis, or your weight has increased, is indicated in these three lines. So I hope this video was pretty informative for you, and you have enjoyed watching this. And I hope Friend of Diabetic Software will provide you with very useful analysis. Wish you a very good health. Thank you.